Southern Food and Beverage Museum, and so I've been with the museum since the beginning. And
Which was when?
well, we opened in a physical space in 2008, but we were an idea in 2004. So from the standpoint of Hurricane Katrina, we actually had plans and a place where we were going to build that were just kind of lost during Hurricane Katrina. I don't mean they were lost because they were flooded out. I just mean that we weren't able to carry them out because the world changed after Hurricane Katrina. But we were not open prior to Hurricane Katrina. We had two pop-up exhibits. And we did pop-ups because...
Describe a pop-up exhibit for me.
Well, a pop-up exhibit is an exhibit that illustrates something about your museum and your concept and whatever, but you do it in a borrowed space and for a limited period of time, kind of like a pop-up restaurant. And we did that because there are not a lot of food museums out there. And so every time we talk to people about having a food museum here in New Orleans, they would say, oh, is that a place where you have pictures of asparagus or statues of cauliflower, or what's going to be there? And so we realized that without pop-ups to kind of illustrate what we were planning to do, no one would really get it, because you can't talk about it as well as you can illustrate it. So anyway, we had actual physical plans drawn and everything, and the place where we were going to open did not flood. But because it didn't flood, it was in great demand for other reasons because it hadn't flooded. And so what we were going to do was too speculative for them, and so under the new regime of thinking. And so we had to start over. And so that was, the rug getting pulled out from under us. But what it also meant was that we lost an enormous amount of momentum. If you were a cultural organization that was open prior to Katrina, there was this huge array of funding that was available to you to get back on your feet post-Hurricane Katrina. But if you were not open prior to Hurricane Katrina, that funding was not available to you. So we had no funding available to us in that big sort of pot of post-Katrina money. And we just weren't eligible for it. And that's not to say that we would have been eligible, if it weren't there and if Katrina hadn't happened, we still would have been searching for money. But we had to start over, and we couldn't take advantage of the momentum that we had already put into place before Hurricane Katrina. So we were truly starting over, which is what we did. And we actually claim, and I think we're correct, that we were the first new cultural organization that's like an attraction that opened post-Katrina in New Orleans. Not the first one that opened, because many reopened before we opened, but we were the first new thing that opened post-Katrina. And that was in 2008. So it took us a while to get back on our feet. And that was because we were trying to start over with fundraising and everything else in a sort of battered place. So it took a while.
So explain your concept of the Southern Food and Beverage Museum, even from the beginning. What were your goals? What was your dream in this?
Well, our original dream was a lot smaller than what our dream is today. So in those days, our idea was to have an actual museum that collected material culture and that had exhibits that actually illustrated the intersection of food and culture. Wasn't to be necessarily about the food itself, although that's an important element of the culture, it wasn't the only thing. We wanted it to be cultural and how food reflects culture and culture reflects food. So that was our original goal. And I think that if you look at earlier natural history museums and what archaeologists were finding and what was exhibited in those museums, it's all about the search for food in early, the early human and pre-human search for food. And you'll find fish hooks, and you'll find early kinds of netting and pottery and skins used as vessels, and all of these different things that people used in order to, traps and arrow points and all that sort of thing. It was all about the search for food. And then you find the bones and the remains and all of that sort of thing. And then once there was agriculture and writing, all of a sudden, it was as though people stopped eating. And all you had now is the study of art and religion and hierarchical government and war and all of that sort of thing. And anything that was a mention of food was purely incidental. So it went from, even in museums, being the center of the explanation of humanity to having no place at all. And then in art museums, in later times, in art museums and other museums, if it wasn't intrinsically beautiful, then whatever was related to food was not ever displayed. So you might have beautiful glassware when glass was rare. You would have bone china, hand-painted, and beautiful silver or gold vessels or eating implements or whatever, or other kinds of ceramics that were related to eating. But that was the rarefied stuff and the everyday stuff that people ate on. Museums didn't want that because it wasn't intrinsically beautiful. And yet, it was important as a way to document the lives of everyday people. All of that is lost. And so that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to say, we may not be able to find all of those things. They may be lost forever. But we don't want from this day forward for them to be lost. So that 100 years from now, 500 years from now, if somebody is looking at this museum, we will be able to be at least a repository of all of those things. So that means, okay, Fiesta ware, Corel ware, all of that kind of stuff. And what a can is like now. And what do beer bottles look like and how have they changed? And, all of that kind of thing. Because nobody takes pictures of beer bottles and says, oh, let's preserve what this looks like. You might be lucky to find a beer bottle in an ad or whatever. But the early 20th century and certainly late 19th century, you were lucky if you could find a catalog with line drawings that had bottles, wholesale bottles in it. And those things are made out of pulp. They're not going to last forever. And there's nobody saving those catalogs. But what is a better sort of document of the bottle than the bottle itself? And it's going to be preservable in a way that that pulp paper is not. So those are the things that we kept thinking about. So now that we've been around for a while, we actually are trying to start another museum in California that will be a regional museum of the food of that area. And we're looking at places all around the country like that. We've started a library. We're the only standalone culinary library in the country that's, that one that's not related to a culinary school or a university or a big corporation that has its own library. We already have about 17,000 volumes and our catalog is online, and now we've started to receive the papers of chefs, and so our archive is starting to grow in that way. We have started a register of historic places that are related to food. So this could be grocery stores or restaurants or places where people who are important in the food world might have been born, just all kinds of things. So we sort of expanded what we had started out to be. But originally it was just, we're filling a void. Somebody needs to do this, and why haven't they been doing it, you know?
So tell me a little bit about you. You're from New Orleans. How long?
I was born here, and I've lived here. I mean, I have had periods when I didn't live in New Orleans, but there's something about New Orleans that makes you come back, you know. So I went to college in Baton Rouge, went to law school in Baton Rouge, then moved to Germany and lived there for 3 years, then moved to Washington, D.C., and then came back. I even actually moved to California before I graduated from college and was a hippie for a little while.
So what prepared you for this role as a museum director?
I had become I had several different sort of transformations. I was not really fond of being a lawyer. I became a lawyer because I didn't know what else to do. And so once I actually had to practice law, I realized this is really not for me. You're just fighting all the time. You know, everything is a perpetual battle. And so I took a job. It was a part-time job as the director of the Arts Administration program at the University of New Orleans. And I came to that because when I lived in Washington, D.C., there was a lot of pro bono requirement for members of the bar. And so I did my pro bono work with arts organizations. So I was getting involved in copyright issues of arts organizations, tax issues of nonprofits, all of that sort of thing. And then when I moved to New Orleans, they were looking for somebody who could teach arts administration law in this program. And so because of my experience and because I had taught at a university already and I had teaching experience, I got the job. Then the person who was running the program left the city and they asked me if I would take over running the program. So I continued to teach the course, but I also was running the program. So when I was doing that, I became active with the UNO Foundation, which is the parallel organization of UNO, being a state school. And so whenever you were raising money, you wanted to leave it in the foundation, which is private, and not have it in the state, where you have to spend money according to all the state rules. So we opened 2 museums. We opened the D-Day Museum, which is now the World War II Museum, and we opened the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. And I was the CEO of the UNO Foundation when we did those things. So I realized that I really like museums. I like the sort of having all these balls in the air, trying to put it all together, and you know, there's not really one path, and there's a lot of chaos. I'm fond of chaos, and often create it just for its own sake. But so after we opened those 2 museums, I wanted to open this food museum because always I had been interested in food. And when I was in college, really all you could do was study home ec, and that's not what I wanted to do. And so I just kind of decided that I would keep food as something that was an interest and not cooking so much, although I enjoy cooking, but really it was that food culture. Like, why is it that the world was explored because people were looking for peppercorns and nutmeg and things like that, you know? And what happened when all these new foods were discovered by Columbus? And, you know, those were the things that I was interested in. Following trade routes through finding food as it changed from one place to another. That kind of stuff was fascinating to me. And of course, everybody eats, so it's something that really joins us all together. And so I left UNO to start this museum.
So tell me about the activities here. We've been here about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and there's so much going on. What all happens?
And today we're closed. Lots goes on. So we have this wonderful demo kitchen, which also serves as an auditorium and all sorts of things. So we have a lot of food meetings here, as well as other meetings, but definitely food meetings. And we push that, so that it could be coastal erosion and how that's affecting the food supply and, all that kind of stuff. It's not just how do you make this or something like that. It's a pretty broad definition of food. We have people come in to learn about hunger or nutrition or, all that. So we have a restaurant and a bar, and the restaurant is open today, but when we're open and the restaurant is open, we've got people going back and forth through there, and they'll get a drink and they'll walk around the museum while they're having their cocktail or their beer or whatever. We've always said that we can't be afraid of food and drink because we're a food museum. And so we have trash cans in the display areas, which no museums have. So if you come in with a snowball, we don't make you throw it away, we just tell you, don't forget to throw it away in the trash can when you're finished.
So you have speakers,
we have
cooking,
speakers, we have cooking, yes.
The restaurant and bar that's associated with, does that help keep the collections going?
Well,
is it its own separate
It's
thing?
separate, but they rent the space from us. So yes, indirectly it supports us. And we are, just always participating in something, and we're always getting new exhibits. Right now we have the Modernist Cuisine exhibit, which is Nathan Myhrvold's fabulous photographs. I'm just really excited to have that. We're working on the yard back there to open it up to be an outdoor cooking space. And in November we have planned where you can come and spend the night at the museum as we do an overnight pit cooking of a pig, and we'll eat it the next day. So, we're trying to do fun things.